We rely on satellites these days for pretty much everything, right?
It's incredible how much we depend on them now.
Like GPS, obviously.
But we're streaming.
Streaming.
Right.
Even just checking the weather,
Yeah, absolutely.
It's kind of wild to think about. But what if?
What if all that suddenly went dark?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Poof.
It's like a thought that's both fascinating and totally terrifying at the same time.
I know, right? And that possibility, that's what we're diving into today.
Exactly.
It's something called Kessler Syndrome.
Okay, so for anyone who's not familiar with that,
Sure.
What is Kessler Syndrome?
Basically, it's this idea of a runaway chain reaction of collisions in space.
Like a domino effect, but with satellites.
Yeah, precisely. And the scary part is it's not just some abstract theory.
Right. We've got like a whole stack of articles and reports here.
Yes.
And they're painting a pretty alarming picture.
Yeah, I mean, it might sound like something out of a sci-fi movie.
Yeah.
But scientists have been tracking this for decades.
Really?
Yeah, and it's becoming more and more urgent.
So let's unpack this a little bit. Like, how much stuff have we actually put up into space over the years?
Well, since the beginning of the space age,
Oh, yeah.
we've launched almost 20,000 satellites.
Wow, 20,000.
Yeah, and the problem is not all of them are, neatly retired.
Not exactly a perfect disposal system up there.
Not at all. So you've got defunct satellites, spent rocket stages,
Okay.
even tiny bits of debris like paint flecks.
Oh, wow. So it's like everything.
Pretty much. And all of that zipping around up there at insane speeds.
Yeah, that can't be good.
No, it's definitely a recipe for disaster. The European Space Agency estimates there are over 40,500 pieces of debris bigger than 10 centimeters.
And that's just the stuff they can track.
Exactly. There are millions of smaller pieces that we just can't see.
So like a massive highway with no traffic rules.
And everything's moving thousands of miles per hour.
Yeah, so bound to be some fender benders up there.
More like catastrophic collisions.
Yeah.
Even a tiny fragment can cause major damage when it hits a satellite at those speeds.
And every collision just creates more debris.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which then increases the risk of even more collisions. That's the whole cascading effect we're talking about that defines the Kessler Syndrome.
And this isn't just hypothetical, right? There was that incident earlier this year.
You're talking about the Chinese rocket?
Yeah, exactly. That really brought this whole thing to light.
Right. Back in March, a Long March 3B rocket broke apart in orbit and created this cloud of over 350 trackable fragments.
And I remember reading that the altitude where that happened made it particularly bad.
It did. It happened at about 500 kilometers.
Okay, so is that altitude just extra crowded or something?
It is. 500 kilometers is a very popular spot for satellites. So there's already a lot of stuff up there.
Okay.
Plus, debris at that altitude takes much longer to naturally fall back to Earth and burn up.
Ah, so it's kind of a long-lasting hazard zone.
Exactly. It was a significant event.
And I remember that the U.S. Space Force was monitoring the whole thing pretty closely.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They were tracking it all in real time.
Yeah.
It just shows you how real this threat is.
It's not just theoretical anymore.
Definitely not. We're actively tracking these incidents as they happen.
And I guess all that data is helping us understand just how close we might be to this full-blown Kessler scenario.
Exactly. It's all connected.
So thinking about the consequences, I mean, if a bunch of vital satellites got knocked out,
It's pretty scary stuff.
Yeah.
One expert, John L. Crassides, he put it pretty bluntly. He said, the Kessler Syndrome is going to come true.
Wow. So he's saying it's not a matter of if, but when.
Exactly. And the impact on our daily lives could be huge. Think about it. No internet, no cell service.
No GPS.
Even things like accurate weather forecasting, gone.
It sounds almost apocalyptic.
It's a real concern, and there's still a lot of debate about whether it's already happening. Some experts say we're seeing the early stages.
Yeah.
Others say not yet.
So is there anything we can do, or are we all doomed?
Well, I wouldn't say doomed just yet. Regardless, this incident with the Chinese rocket,
Right.
It really highlights how urgent this is. And it underscores what experts like Crassides are warning us about.
So if it's not too late,
Right.
what can we actually do about this?
Well, one thing's for sure, we need a much stronger global effort.
But haven't there already been some international agreements about space debris?
Yes. There have organizations like the Interagency Space Debris Coordination Committee
Okay.
and the UN. They've been working on guidelines for debris mitigation for a while.
So are those guidelines not enough?
They're a good start, but we need to ramp them up significantly. We need stricter rules, better enforcement, and more proactive ways to actually remove the debris that's already up there.
So speaking of adding more stuff to space, what about all these mega-constellations like Starlink?
Ah, yes, the double-edged sword.
Because on one hand, it's amazing they're trying to bring internet access to everyone.
Right.
But on the other hand, they're launching thousands of new satellites.
And that's a lot of potential new collision points.
Like we're balancing these amazing advancements
with this ticking time bomb in orbit.
Yeah, and that raises a pretty crucial question.
What is the long-term cost of all this progress?
Exactly. How do we weigh the benefits
against the risk of these truly devastating consequences?
It's a tough one. And this is where things get really interesting because
this is where we have to kind of shift our thinking.
Heck.
Instead of seeing ourselves as these explorers racing to conquer space, we need to start acting more like responsible citizens.
Okay, I love that analogy.
Yeah.
But what does being a responsible citizen of space actually look like?
Well, it means taking a more holistic approach. Thinking about the long-term sustainability of everything we do up there.
So less about planting flags, more about cleaning up after ourselves.
Exactly. And that means tackling this debris problem head on.
Okay, so how do we actually do that? It feels so overwhelming.
It is a complex challenge, but there are some really promising solutions being explored.
Okay, so give me some hope here. What are we talking about?
Well, one key area is debris mitigation.
Okay, so what does that mean?
It's about designing satellites and rockets in a way that minimizes the creation of new debris.
So making sure those old satellites get dragged back into the atmosphere to burn up?
Yeah, exactly. It's called deorbiting, and it's becoming more and more common.
Yeah.
We're also looking at propulsion systems that are less likely to create debris, even if they malfunction.
Interesting.
And even using materials that break down more easily upon re-entry so they don't pose as much of a risk.
So it's about being more mindful from the very beginning.
Right. Thinking about the entire life cycle of these objects.
And those UN guidelines we talked about earlier, they play into this, right?
Absolutely. The UN's Space Debris Mitigation Guidelines.
Okay.
They basically provide a framework for responsible behavior in space.
Okay.
Encouraging nations and companies to minimize debris creation.
But as we said, they probably need some more teeth.
Yeah, stronger enforcement mechanisms and maybe even stricter rules are necessary.
So mitigation is about preventing the problem from getting worse.
Right.
But what about all the junk that's already up there?
That's where active debris removal comes in.
Okay, and this is where things get really sci-fi.
It is pretty wild stuff. We're talking about technologies that can actually capture and remove debris from orbit.
Okay, seriously. How do you wrangle a piece of metal that's zipping around the planet at thousands of miles an hour?
There are a few different approaches. Some involve giant nets or even harpoons.
You're kidding.
Nope. Then you drag the debris down to burn up in the atmosphere.
Wow.
Others are developing robotic spacecraft that can basically rendezvous with debris and either nudge it into a safer orbit or even attempt repairs in some cases.
Wait, hold on. Repair a broken satellite in space?
It sounds crazy.
I know. That's insane. Are we really at that level?
It's still early stages, but the progress is incredible. And it really highlights how this problem needs expertise from all kinds of fields.
Not just rocket scientists?
No, not at all. You need policy experts, economists, even ethicists.
Ethics. So it's not just about how to clean up the mess, but also about who decides what gets cleaned up.
Exactly. And who pays for it.
Right.
There are all these questions about responsibility and liability.
Like who owns the debris in the first place?
Right. And what about objects that might have historical or cultural significance?
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's not a simple cleanup job. There are a lot of factors to consider.
This is so much more complicated than I ever imagined.
It's a truly unique challenge.
It's like we're having to invent a whole new set of rules for this problem that we created.
And it really forces us to confront how our actions here on Earth impact the space environment.
Right, like everything is connected.
Exactly. It's a big shift in thinking from just exploring space to actively managing our presence there.
So where do we go from here? It's easy to feel kind of powerless in the face of such a massive problem.
I understand that, but there are things we can do.
Okay, so what can our listeners do? Like, what can everyday people do to actually help with this?
Well, first and foremost, stay informed. The more you understand about space debris and the efforts to address it, the better equipped you'll be to advocate for solutions.
Okay, so knowledge is power. Got it. But are there other more concrete actions we can take?
Absolutely. Support the organizations working on this problem. There are a lot of nonprofits and research institutions doing fantastic work.
Okay.
Even small donations can make a difference. And think about the companies you support.
Right.
Do they have a clear stance on space sustainability? Are they actively trying to minimize their debris footprint?
So it's about using our consumer power to push for change.
Exactly. It all adds up.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to reach out to your elected officials.
Good point.
Let them know that this is an issue you care about.
It's about holding our leaders accountable.
Right, and pushing for policies that prioritize space sustainability.
Because this isn't just some far-off problem for future generations to deal with.
No, it's happening now and it affects us all.
It's about recognizing that space is a shared resource.
A global commons that we all have a responsibility to protect.
It's really about expanding that idea of citizenship to include space.
Exactly. Thinking beyond national borders and recognizing our collective responsibility for this incredible environment.
Well said. This has been quite a journey. We started by talking about how much we rely on satellites.
Right.
Then we kind of dove into this potential nightmare scenario with the Kessler Syndrome.
Yeah.
And now we're ending on this note of hope and collective action.
It's a complex issue, but one that's full of possibility.
And it all starts with recognizing that we have the power to shape the future of space.
To make sure it remains a source of wonder and opportunity for generations to come.
Yeah, it really does feel like we're at this turning point, right?
I think so.
Where we need to decide what kind of future we want in space.
Absolutely.
So if that's the big picture, let's talk about what this means for our listeners.
Okay.
For everyday people. What can they do?
Well, it might sound simple, but awareness is huge.
Okay.
Talking about this issue.
Right.
Sharing what you've learned with friends, family, colleagues. It all helps.
So starting those dinner table debates about space junk.
Exactly. Why not?
I love it.
Yep.
But beyond awareness, are there other things we can do to be more proactive?
Absolutely. You can support those organizations we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
The ones working on debris mitigation and removal.
Yep.
Many of them are nonprofits, so even small donations can make a big difference.
Right.
And when you're thinking about the companies you support, think about their stance on space sustainability.
Yep.
Are they actually trying to minimize their debris footprint?
So voting with our wallets, making conscious choices about the tech we use.
Exactly.
And don't forget about our elected officials, right?
Absolutely. Reach out to them.
Yeah.
Let them know this is something you care about.
It's about demanding accountability.
Right.
And pushing for policies that actually prioritize space sustainability.
Because this isn't some far-off problem.
Right.
It's happening right now.
And it affects everyone.
It does.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that space is a shared resource. The global commons that we all have a responsibility to protect.
And I love that you keep bringing it back to this idea of space citizenship.
Well, it's important.
It is. It's about thinking beyond national borders and really embracing this collective responsibility.
For this incredible environment.
This deep dive has been amazing.
It has.
We started by talking about how much we depend on satellites.
Right.
Then we went down this rabbit hole of the Kessler Syndrome.
Which is a bit scary.
Yeah, but now we're ending on this note of hope and collective action.
And possibility.
Yeah.
It's a complex issue, but it's one where we can actually make a difference.
And it all starts with recognizing that we have the power to shape the future of space.
To ensure that it remains the source of wonder and opportunity.
I love that. For everyone listening, I hope you'll keep exploring this topic.
Yeah, there's so much to learn.
We'll be sure to share some links in the show notes to get you started.
And remember, the future of space is in our hands.
So true. Let's make sure we make the right choices.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
Until next time, keep looking up and stay curious.